Is Donna
Oh.
not coming?
Got it. Frank, say it again.
No, it was Derek.
I said, is Donna not coming?
Donna's here.
Donna's here. She's incognito.
Oh, she's a brook with a branch.
She's a brook with a branch, yeah. So let's
There she
remember we're being
is.
recorded. There she is.
I was eating dinner. I'm sorry.
At the office, of course.
Yeah, I home away
So
from
I'm
home.
gonna, I'll call this, oh, you are, okay. I'm calling this meeting oh, you know, we don't have a minutes taker, Frank.
You're looking at what square, Ellen? Hold on.
The one that's lit up green. Oh, it's yours. How about one more time? You do such a good job.
Thanks, that's sweet. I will be happily do that. Let me just find. There we go. I'll work on last month's draft. No,
Okay.
okay. Don't worry, I'll work it out. Yeah.
All right, so we'll call
Calling
this
the meeting
meeting
at
to
what
order.
time?
It is 5:36. And we are here. Steve Penner said to me that he is officially, his tenure on the ARB is over. And so he is stepping down. So he is not here. I thought that Peter was going to be coming because I spoke to him this morning, so he might show up. But we have three of us, so we have a quorum. We can continue. So we're reading of the minutes of August 3rd, which were so well done by Frank. Any editing or questions about those?
Oh, no,
Eric?
I approve
You're
them.
good.
Motion to approve.
Me too. I'll second. I'll second that. Applications, old business. Just a quick aside that for old business, even though it's not on here, Billy Morrison is about to submit his drawings and plans for all of the landscaping for his building. He
Great.
emailed me this week to say that that was going in. So hopefully we'll have a meeting set up about that soon. And we're right up to other business, the clarification and on the role and responsibility of the ARB. Matt,
Great. Thanks, Ellen.
want to talk?
Sure. You guys can all hear me okay? Let me know. Sometimes my computer goes, makes me turn the volume up. So just holler. I had a conversation with Steve Penner. It's got to be 2.5 months ago now. And he told me that he thought that there wasn't a lot of guidance from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Architecture Review Board. The Architecture Review Board is under the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Planning and Zoning Commission has the option per the general statutes to either appoint an architecture review board or to hire a consultant to review the architectural merits of any application that comes in. The commission, I don't remember quite when the commission opted to appoint an architecture review board, but it was a while ago. It was probably more than a decade ago.
It was 10 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So based on Steve's comments to me, I guess I wanted to talk to you all to see whether you thought that the information that you had from us, from the Planning and Zoning Commission, gave you enough direction and a clear mandate for what the charge of the Architecture Review Board is. So that's my first question.
I would say, to me, no. Yeah, no. I mean, yeah, no. To make it, I mean, Ellen sent some information which helps a little, but there's an awful lot of, I guess, regulatory speak that I'm not quite sure I understand what all of it. I mean, there's a lot of things that make references to other statutes and things in the paperwork we got.
Mhm.
So I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what we use as aesthetic regulations, if there are any, or what exactly are we doing? That
Okay.
makes it, sorry, it's a very broad, but it seems like after having been to 3 or 4, or actually about 4 of the meetings, it's not really
Yeah.
clear what we're doing, to me.
Great. Ellen, do you feel somewhat the same way?
Yeah, I just want to give Frank an opportunity to speak if he would like to. Except you're on mute.
Okay, I just building on what Derek's saying, I think one of the challenges that I've always had philosophically with the ARB is that it's incredibly subjective.
Yeah.
And I think there are some challenges to the town of Kent that are preventing us from being more clearly defined, particularly because we're not a historic district. So this is not a historical preservation effort. This is not trying to maintain a certain period architecturally or to sustain some styles, because there don't exist any in this town. And so I think the challenge has always been, how do we operate without any parameters? And I think that's a philosophical question that the ARB has to answer for itself. I think that the relationship with planning and zoning is relatively clear, but I think where it gets a little slippery is that we sort of fly by the seat of our pants. And I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. And so I think if we were able to establish some sort of structure, I don't know how to do that, but I think if we were able to do that, it would help us function a little bit more predictably and a little bit more responsibly.
So
that's
I
kind of my
have,
point.
just to intersperse here, I have over the years dealt with many ARBs in many towns in Connecticut and other states. There is no board that I've ever dealt with that it's not subjective. It's not, it is objective. And
Objective.
it's clearly subjective. And it's, while there are, that section 5100 is fairly definitive of the character of Kent, all you need to do is to look at Kent and you kind of get the feeling, but there, it's almost impossible to put absolute parameters on what you can do. Now, John Baker tried. He was very involved with detail and things of that nature. But in a way, it's just a check to make sure that nothing clearly reprehensible happens in our town. It's just a check. Planning and zoning takes it. I mean, we're in the same situation in a lot of cases. Not everything is objective. And everyone kind of strives for that. But there are a lot of things that I think you can point to in that section 5100 that gives some guidance.
It's
Good.
interesting, Wes, that you're saying this, because I'm a resident of West Cornwall now. And the Planning and Zoning Commission up here has been having a similar conversation with some legislation that's going through this little town about work at home and what that means. And the word character has been woven into some of the discourse. And I think that that's a very tricky word,
Yeah.
because character defines a person or an individual or a character set, a collection of traits. And I think we need to, or I would suggest that the ARB in Kent try to define what those parameters are of character and traits. Because I think where it gets a little bit tricky, especially with semantics, is that this can appear to be exclusionary. So we have to make sure that this is an inclusive board that is an invitation to all. And I think when the word character gets woven into it, it gets a little bit tricky, because it could mean not like me or not in my backyard. And so I think that's where this is a very delicate conversation and requires a lot of thoughtfulness in terms of how we put this together. If that helps at all.
With regard to the character, because with regard to that word character, because the recent legislation that came out statewide somewhat bans the use of the word character. So we have to go through our regulations and get rid of that word.
Right.
So you're absolutely.
What does it get replaced with?
Yeah, Matthew, did they give you something else to use?
They didn't. They've left that up to us.
Of course.
We've got some ideas, and I think I personally think that character is a great word, because it somewhat defines us. I think Frank is right that we have to identify what those character traits are, but character is a defining term, and it doesn't need to be exclusionary, but we have to be really careful that it doesn't become exclusionary, because we certainly want a diverse mix of people and families and ages and all of that stuff in town.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the architectural review, we want not homogeny, but we want similarities. So part of what Wes was saying before, that section 5100, it gives us some clues as to what we should be looking for to compare what's being proposed to what's existing already. And in Kent, it's a little bit eclectic.
Right.
There's no one style.
So many times it's a matter of scale, perfectness, aesthetics, and all of those things are subjective.
Yes.
Art. Do you like the art? Well, that's kind of
Depends on which gallery.
right.
Right.
So what do you keep referring
Certainly,
to 5100? What is 5100?
It's a section in our regulation for the overlay district of the downtown area. If you have the zoning regulations, it's the whole special district that deals with the ARB.
So if we take a step
So it's
back
section
from that,
8(2)J, is that it? That's what was sent?
no, that's the general statutes, Ellen. So it's agenda item 6A-KVOD, which is short for an acronym for Kent Village Overlay District. And just to take a step back, within the regulations, there are districts, residential, rural residential, and Kent Village 1 and 2. But this is an overlay district, and those overlay districts. It's just another it's another set of criteria that we want to manage. Hey, Pete, that we want to manage, and it puts some additional, maybe not restrictions, but ideals that we want to look at when we look at an application.
Matthew, if I might ask, what was the interest behind the P and Z to want to call this meeting together? Was there a specific goal in mind, or just really to have this open discussion?
My goal, and my goal along with Wes is to understand what would make your job easier. Because, you know, as I said, I had a somewhat of a complaint, an observation, somewhat negative observation, with regard to the direction given to the ARB. And one, is there something that we can do to make it easier for you? And two, which is maybe a distant second in terms of what I would like to see, do we want to continue on with an ARB, or maybe go to a paid consultant? I really prefer to continue with the ARB, but I want to give you,
Right.
Commission want to give you the tools.
The ARB has to have a
Pete, would
registered
you-
architect, correct?
I believe
Yes,
that
It's,
right now, yes.
well, it's either an architect or
Or a planner.
Planner,
Planner,
Yeah.
right.
right.
And Pete,
And we
Peter
have
is,
one.
Pete, would you share what you shared with me today about going to Rye? Your experience with the BAR there? And you're on mute, by the way. Good.
Whoops.
There you go. No?
Rye is a tough town, by the way.
Well, interestingly enough, if Pete does come on, he just had an experience with, and they
Yeah.
referred to it instead of an ARB, they experienced with the BAR. Are you there, Pete? Can you hear me? He's out. So
Yeah, those Westchester
when he
folks, they
pipes
can
it.
be tough.
Yeah.
he said that, he was looking over what they are, and this is Rye, which is a, fairly bigger chunk of property and population as well. And he said that their BAR was similar to ours. Pete, you're still on mute. I don't know if that helps.
There. Is that
Ah,
is
There
that
you
good?
are.
Sorry.
Okay,
Um,
Pete, yeah, Pete, would you go ahead and talk about it now? That'd be
sure.
great.
Yeah. I just well, twice now. Over the course of the past month, I was kind of on the other side of the table in front of the, and down in Rye, Westchester. They have their Board of Architectural Review. Essentially, it's attempting to serve the same purpose. I think that having been on the ARB now for 2 years or so, I have two observations. One is that I think Rye struggles with this. Other towns that we've looked at, they struggle with it. It's not a historic district, so we don't have a set of details that we're trying to replicate to preserve some sort of architectural character. It's more of this sort of nebulous idea of context, right? What is contextual, and sort of more of a general sense of character. And I think that's hard to put into any sort of formal guidelines because we're not replicating architectural details. And I think that also there needs to be an understanding of where.
Oh,
Uh-oh,
Oh,
you froze up.
And I think if we're going to keep our blinders on and
Okay.
stay, in our lane, it's really the architectural. It should be the detailing, the architectural detailing. So I think one tricky thing, and I'll get back to Ryan in a second. One tricky thing is really understanding the limits of our scope when we're reviewing something. In Rye, they don't even have a handbook. They talk about just we're looking for contextual. We don't want it to look just like the house next to it. We don't want cookie cutter, but we also don't want it to be too far in the other direction. So essentially, they're trying to have some bumpers up. But there was no guidebook, I think, because it's hard to do. And the other, just an observation, is down there. when you apply for a building permit, it's one package. It goes to the building department, it goes to the building inspector, the elevations go to the architectural review board. And that's one joint application. You cannot get your building permit without being approved, both from, you know, more of a technical code standpoint from the building inspector and also from the contextual kind of architectural review. So that's where the teeth come in having an ARB down there, which is a different mechanism, my understanding, than what we have here, where we review and then make a recommendation to planning and zoning. What happens if it's a project that doesn't go in front of planning and zoning? I don't know the answer to that. So those are just some observations, but I'll stop ranting.
So let me answer a couple of those questions. The Architecture Review Board in Kent is put in place to review applications that come before the Planning and Zoning Commission within the village district, which is the VR, the Village Residential 1 or the Village Residential 2. Anything that comes before the commission in those two residential districts have to go in front of the ARB. Now, what comes before the Planning and Zoning Commission is defined in it's whether it's a major activity or a minor activity. So minor activities don't need to come before us. They don't come before us, and therefore they don't come before you, because they're really not making any changes to the appearance of the building. They're doing work on the inside, or they're exchanging like for like. When it's a more than a minor application, it's an application for more than a minor modification to a building, then it comes to us, and therefore it goes to you. Now you all don't get involved with anything in the rural district, because most of those things go by right. Even when there's a special permit application in the rural district, the Architecture Review Board doesn't review it. But as you know, with the subdivision that's being proposed, that's in the VR2, and that got passed on to you all for your review. If we go back and talk about the planning and the zoning regulations and that section 5100 that Wes talked about, it's really it gives you, it lays out some things that we should be looking at in terms of the architecture review. So if without reading all of these things, I would say that's, on page 73 of the regulations, which you can either see through the materials that Ellen sent out today through Donna, or Donna sent out today through Ellen, or you can look at the regulations, and I'm happy to share those regulations with you by email, or you can get them through the town website. But if I look at page 73 under 5110, purpose and intent, the intent of these regulations is to maintain these existing village scale, which Wes talked about a little bit earlier, by encouraging buildings that are generally compatible in size and character. So I know this is all going to be really subjective, and I'm terribly uncomfortable with subjective, and that's why I'm happy that you guys are around. I want somebody to tell me what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Go ahead.
I would stop me, Ellen, too, because maybe you just hit
Okay.
it. But number 2 is preserving significant structures. Yeah, you go ahead, because I'm just going to read.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we've discussed over the years, which is really compiles the difficulty, is that there's no sort of stopgap measure if the ARB says, well, we don't like this situation, or there's no way to prevent it from happening. It's like having a police officer stopping someone for a speeding ticket, but he can't give them a ticket. He just says, like, don't speed anymore, and the person goes on their way. There's really no backup ability for the planning and zoning, or I'm not even sure with you guys, to follow through with what your requests and requirements are for people. and it's a difficult situation for most towns to be in.
Mhm. I would
Um,
say though, Ellen,
go
that
ahead.
I would say that you, as an architecture review board, this board that's convening now has the opportunity to say, no, it doesn't fit. We don't like it, and here's why. And so it's not meant to be a rubber stamp. You know, when somebody comes to you with a building that you don't like, that doesn't look like it fits, that the Planning and Zoning Commission is looking to you to say that doesn't fit, and here's why.
Yes, you are correct. And in a particular example has come up in the last few years where we actually did make a decision saying, this is what we prefer and this is what we want to happen. And the particular owner did what they wanted to do anyway. And there was no recourse from the town to say you didn't follow the guidelines that were presented to you.
Are you
And so-
referring to
so
the
that's-
gallery?
No, I'm not.
Oh,
So
Gallery
yeah.
has another, I mean, that's another situation unto itself. I'm not sure what, where the particular complaint was, obviously, but it's that, we have found in the, the years that I've been involved, is that we feel in a way like our hands are tied with the situation because we don't have the wherewithal to continue with any requests that might be presented. Because the applicant in this particular case just said, no,
Well, we have
and they
had,
went ahead and did what they wanted.
yeah, we've had several cases of that in zoning, where an applicant
Yeah,
simply
exactly.
does not do it, and the only recourse is the courts. And
Right.
that's the recourse.
On the other hand,
And
we've
what,
had
what
very-
do we all do as a town? What do we do with either of those situations? They just don't care.
on the other hand, we've had very positive experiences and gone through iterations of design and have had pretty good success. So, it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I think there's
Right,
a
right.
reality to our town, which is that we don't have the funding to fight something legally. Let's just say what it is. And that is what it is. And so we can do everything that we can to impact or influence or try to veer or drive something in a certain direction based on what we think our parameters are. But the truth is we don't have any enforcement protocol set up. So that's just the reality. So we do what we can and we do the best we can. And sometimes we fail and sometimes we succeed. And I think that that's just the reality of being in a small town.
Well,
So
fortunately, yeah, I think fortunately, most applicants want to comply with the regulation.
agree. I
Don't
agree.
find
Wes.
any applicants that don't.
I agree, Wes. And I think, I'm just going to say, the gas station was a great example of a very, at times painful process. But I think the outcome was really favorable. And while it's not a beautiful thing, it's better than the original proposal when we were able to interject and influence the direction that went from a design perspective. And I think where the owner originally wanted to take it was something that didn't feel integrated into our town. And so where we gave him direction was rather broad, but we said, let's keep it barn-like. And John worked really hard with the owner to get it in a direction that we all felt good about. It became a little painful towards the end because they started to get too granular in the detail that we were offering. And at a certain point, you just have to say enough, build your building, But I think
May I
that
ask
the
what you're
outcome
talking
was
about?
very positive. I'm sorry.
What project was this?
This was the Petco station on the corner, the gas
Oh,
station.
okay. I didn't,
You
I
see,
think that was before you, Derek.
you did make a difference.
I think we did. And I
Yes.
think in that
That's-
case, it felt like a very
yeah.
positive experience. The
Right.
challenge was that we put that poor man through the ringer. And at a certain point, I felt like we were being assholes. Sorry for, being honest, but we just needed to back off. The guy did everything we asked him to, and we took him through the process 5 times. And by the 5th time, I was like, just do it. Just go and do your building, because we can't hold you up any longer. And I felt like it started out in a really positive way and it ended up in a positive way. But there was a moment there where I just thought, Jesus Christ, we got to back off this man and let him do his work. And so it became a little bit funky at the end. And maybe anybody else on the board didn't have the same reaction, but I started to feel really uncomfortable with it.
So
No, it was very uncomfortable, but as you said, Frank, the end all result was that the few changes that we encouraged him to do, he did. And, the building and the town are better off for it, because it's
Right.
way better than his original plan.
Right.
So the process, the process as I see it looks like this. The Architecture Review Board has a certain set of parameters that they can look at, some guidelines that they can look at to help them steer an applicant. They work with that applicant to steer that building to look like it fits within the town of Kent. If the applicant isn't responsive to that process, then the Architecture Review Board tells them, the Architecture Review Board tells the Planning and Zoning Commission that we don't approve the aesthetic of this, which is going to, we don't approve the aesthetic of this building, which is going to really inform the decision of the Planning and Zoning whether to approve the application or not. So it's, just like we take into account the engineer's comments and we take into account the fire department's comments, we're taking it into account in a very serious way, the Architecture Review Board. So that's one stopgap where the Architecture Review Board says we don't approve, and the Planning and Zoning Commission says you haven't satisfied the Architecture Review Board, either we're going to disapprove it or you go back and work with them. Then
I think bottom line, it's a judgment. It's your judgment.
Right.
What happens in a
The
case like
other,
Morrison Gallery, where they approved one thing, the guy built something different, and it was like, what were we to do?
So in that case, Derek, I would say that you as a board didn't have all the tools that you needed, because I went back and I looked at those meetings, and you didn't have the information, you didn't have the design that we collectively originally approved. So when they built something different than what we all remembered, we went back and we couldn't find what was designed. And I have a really clear recollection of what was designed, because I knew that it was going to be in the center of town, and I knew that what they had originally designed was really pretty, and then what they came back to was less pretty, but still okay, because they had certain components in there, certain elements of that front facade. But when you guys got that back, and we said, wait, they're not building what we said, what we approved. We didn't have anything to prove. That's because we had lost the file. So we on the architecture, on the planning and zoning side, didn't give you all the right tools for that. If we had all the right tools and they built something that was clearly not approved, we collectively, you, the ARB, could have said, that is absolutely not good. We don't like that at all. And here's what you have to do in order to make it better. I watched that. And I think, Frank, you said in one of those meetings that, can we ask them to put a covered walkway to break up that front facade a little bit over to that other door? And I think you absolutely had the right to do that. So that's a somewhat a long-winded question, response, Derek, that I think that when somebody doesn't build what has been approved, then we have the absolute right to say, do something different, or we're going to issue a cease and desist.
I'm just going to throw something in, because I think, doesn't the planning and zoning have that same problem? And I'll throw, for example, the wall that Carly Rakovansky built. You were able to put a cease and desist in with that wall, but the wall is there. She hasn't done anything with the building. We've actually shot ourselves in the foot, because that building is completely falling apart. And the intention of the planning and zoning and the IRB was to maintain the historic value of that building. And everybody's lost now, because the wall is still there and the building's falling down. So where do you or we have the ability to not let that kind of thing happen? Morrison Gallery is a great example. What Bass did is a great example. All these things.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what Wes said a little bit earlier, that most people, most applicants will design something and they'll get something approved and then they'll build it, and they won't make any changes. And there are those
Right.
bad. And I don't want to say bad, and I don't want to say that Billy Morrison did anything wrong, and that's not the purpose of what I want to do here. But the long and the short of it is that our job is to review an application, and from the ARB standpoint, does it fit within the character? We have to find a better word for that. Does it fit within these Kent Village Overlay District guidelines? And then approve
So
it, and then go.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about in all of this kind of a conversation is what part of each application does the ARB have? We really are not in charge of or shouldn't be in charge of whether the height is correct or the width or the those things. That is so much more of just a planning, zoning, and engineering kind of thing. We are our goal, or I think our planning is that we are in charge of the aesthetics of something. And I'm trying not to use the word character. How does this feel? How does it look in the sense of the rest of the town?
Well, again, I think you're making a judgment as to the appropriateness of the building. And that's really your function.
Right.
If I could say.
I'll use the Morrison Gallery as an example only because it's there. The size of that building, does it fit within our planning and zoning regulations to the height and the width of that building? If it does fit within our preconceived planning and zoning, then the architectural board doesn't really look at that size. We look at the design aspect of the building. And that's our assumption, or my assumption anyway. I would assume that everybody agrees with me, but
That's absolutely right. There's no question, Ellen, that's in a large part, that's Donna's job. She gets an application in, and the first thing that she's checking is to make sure that the setbacks are right, that the front and side and rear yards are right, that the heights are right, and all of those things fit within the standards of the regulations. And it's Architecture Review Board's responsibility to look at the aesthetic.
right.
Yeah, and I think in rather than thinking about things in terms of character, if we just keep going back to contextual, and I suppose that in a case where something is fits within the bulk regulations, but it's visually massive, and we're concerned about that, we could still address that as an architectural review board by thinking about any sort of architectural suggestions to kind of break up the visual, the visual mass of it, if it doesn't seem contextual because of it, its facade.
Yeah. And I don't mean to sound, I just want to clarify, I don't mean to sound argumentative in any way. I'm trying to say, how do we make this work? That's really it. One of the things we kept talking about, and Steve always hated this, but I was saying, we always seem to work in this gray area. Everything we do is gray because it's subjective. It's like, and his feeling is things need to be black and white. There has to be a rule and a regulation that we can define what our decisions are. And the ARB just doesn't seem to fall within any black and white. And that's the challenge. And I'm sure it's with every non-historic district town in the world.
there is no black and white when you're dealing with aesthetics.
Right, so,
So in order to make your, to get back to the first thing that we said, so the Architecture Review Board is reviewing within a certain set of standards. And we started out the conversation by saying, do you feel like you have the tools to understand what those standards are? And both Derek and Frank, and to a lesser extent, Ellen, said, no, we don't. So I think if I could ask a favor, that you all read through this, the section 5100. That's the document that Donna has labeled agenda item 6A KVOD.
Right.
And we look at section.
this is what she sent out to everybody
Yeah.
this week, right?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
we
okay.
have it.
So
Have
take
it.
a
We
look at
we all
that
read it, yeah.
and see whether there are components of that resonate with you all. And maybe we can come up, maybe we can distill these items. I'm going to say that in section 5100, there's there's 7 numbered enumerated items. In 5120 is good to read. 5130 is good to read, but 5142, no, I'm sorry.
I would say 5150, Matt, is really the most important one for us to consider.
I think you're right, Frank.
Yeah,
think
the
that's
design
really-
considerations, and it's,
That's really, to me, where it gets a little tricky. And this is where aesthetics start to play into it. And I think we as a board need to be comfortable with this outline so that we can enforce it. And it's tough. I mean, I've read it, it's a really tough document because it feels very, sorry, Wes, subjective. And I know that's our job.
Yeah,
So it's
I don't
hard.
think there's any way around it. I don't think there's any way around it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
so could I ask you all how many applicants, say a month or that you get? You don't have a application to review every month, is that correct?
I would say the past year
That
has
is
been very
correct.
quiet.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that we just reviewed was and you guys are handling it now, thank God, the little project on the north side of town.
Right. Right.
Tiny little thing.
Right. But architecturally, it works very nicely. It's a very well-conceived project.
From a design perspective, the
Yeah.
ARB was very comfortable with that project.
Right, exactly.
Where it's going to get tricky for us, and I think where we have to be sort of maintain some very clear boundaries, is that if this project continues to move forward and as they begin to execute, we as a ARB have to make sure that the materials are selected sensitively, that the actual designs are within keeping of what we feel is appropriate, that it's not our job to say whether the town agrees with the development at all or not, that's you guys. But for us, it's about making sure that it is thoughtfully created in a way that feels appropriate to our town.
You see, that is extremely important.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
And one of the things-
our fear, I think, is that these are a group, we love the design, we love the concept. Our fear is that these are inexperienced developers who don't really know what they're getting into, that there may be some architectural modifications made that we will have to approve, that there are questions about affordability, there are questions about sensitivity to site, and there are a lot of things that we don't know yet. But conceptually, we really dig it.
Well, the developer as a personality is something that you cannot make judgments on. That's not
Right.
your role to
Right.
judge who's doing it.
Correct.
Mhm.
but it
And
is the
We are-
affordability isn't our role either, is it?
What's that?
Affordability isn't our role.
It's not, but I think that there is a sensitivity to the makeup of town. And so I guess when I say affordability, maybe I'm really speaking about square footage and size and scale. And so these are smaller houses designed for young families, or in my mind,
Or
for
older.
retired or for older, residents. So we I mean, personally, I liked that aspect of it. I liked the communal aspect of it. I liked the fact that it felt very sensitively designed around each other and the environment. And so that was what really turned me on to the project. I also happen to like the aesthetic. So it worked on many levels, but you're right, Derek, it's not about affordability. That's not my role.
And I would go further to say that the size and the massing and the spacing of those buildings are set. We as a group, to the commission as a whole, and the ARB as a subset, are proving what they've shown us. So if they come back with a bigger building with different massing, with different materials visually, then it's not only our right, but it's our responsibility to tell them, sorry, but that's not what we approved, and you go back and pick something else. If you've got something other than vertical barnwood on that building, I want to know why it's something other than vertical barnwood. And if you want to use hardy panel with battens, that's fine, as long as it looks the same.
Right.
Yeah.
They chose to do.
Certainly, we
They,
as the ARB came to three different projects within the town where the plans were changed halfway through. They got approved, and then each of these situations came back to us and said, for different reasons, we're changing our plan. And here they are, sort of halfway through their building process, or 3/4 into, and your hands are tied. What do you say to somebody? And they say, well, we're going to take the second story off of our original plan.
Say sorry, but you can't. Sorry.
Right.
But your problem
You
is.
can't
But
do
not
that.
my problem.
I mean, it's happened more than 3 times that I can think of right on our main street with both planning and zoning. And that's like, how do we deal with that as a town? Do you say to, are you able to say to someone, your original plan said you had to build 2 stories, you have to build 2 stories? How do you deal with that as planning and zoning?
you don't issue a zoning compliance. And if they don't have a zoning compliance, they can't occupy the building.
Right. But they did go ahead and build, where Wilson's is, for example, originally was a 2-story building, and it's now being built as a 1-story building. It's beautiful, thank God, but it didn't follow the original plans. Billy Morrison did not follow the original plans. The redo of Giffords was not the original plans. We kind of come up against that all the time. The challenging part for all of us is that we're dealing with our friends. We're dealing with our community, and if someone, I'll say Billy Morrison, comes up and say, oh, you know what, guys, I'm short on funds. I can't do what I originally planned. We as a community are supportive of this man, and we're like, well, how can we help you? So we have yet another little caveat of challenge with us, because we are a really supportive, small, kind community. And so it just throws another little ball of wax into how we work our way through these processes.
Well, I think that you're making a big difference, and nothing in life is ever 100%. It never is.
Right.
Here. I think you guys are. I think the Architecture Review Board is doing a good job. I couldn't do it personally. I couldn't do it. I'm not an artistic sort of person. I'm a sort of follow the rules rigid guy. So I couldn't do your job, and I'm happy that you guys are doing it. Want to make it so that it's easier for you to do the job that we want you to do.
Well,
we very quickly over the years have discussed if we had something much more regulated, like Penner used to talk about this all the time, you know, because it was too, for Steve, it was just too, you know, feathery for him. And he's like, we need to have, you know, we need to hire somebody. We need to have someone who's really professional to lay down our guidelines so that we know what we can and cannot talk about.
But
And,
Steve,
you know,
like
and what
Steve
Pete and I were
saying,
talking about today was saying, here's the town of Rye that doesn't have it any better than we do. You know, it's such a nebulous kind of thing to define, as you said. So I would think we would all love to have something more concrete.
So can you imagine trying to regulate a house design in a residential neighborhood? Can you imagine that?
No.
No.
Well, so
It was a nightmare, to be honest. It was
Right,
a nightmare, and I ended up having to change my design.
right.
Derek wants to say
so
something.
I just want, so in retrospect, we should have probably come back to zoning and said, here we are with the Morrison Gallery. What, you know, help us with understand what we can do next or something, instead of just like doing it on our own. We should have come back and said, where are we? What do we do? Help us. Correct? No?
That's always an option, Derek, for sure. You know, there's if there's ever a question about what, not about what you should do, but if there's a question about what you're allowed to do,
Oh, well,
or
yeah.
what your responsibility is,
Yeah.
we're absolutely, Donna's there, we're there, I'm there. You know, Wes as an architect, his opinion can be invaluable. Sorry.
Because that for me, just as somebody who hadn't been on it long, I was totally confused by that. I couldn't understand how he built something that wasn't what was originally planned, and it was just happening. And he would, you know, one day he would say the entrance is going to be metal, the next it's going to be stucco, the next it's going to be concrete, and there was no. He was like a loose cannon.
Well, it has to do with money.
I know, but we have to be, as
Well,
Ellen was saying, we have to be somewhat cognizant of it, but we can't let that be our.
No, that's exactly right. And there are some teeth that can be done. I mean, there are cases where they're just not going to be compliant, but you've done everything you can do, where the only recourse is the courts.
And that's a decision that we collectively, you know, have to make, whether it's, you know, we say, you know, as Wes said earlier, you're not going to get a zoning compliance
Right.
certificate.
Right.
But it's not, I mean,
I'm just curious about one other thing. I don't mean to drag this on, but I just want to go back to Carly Rakovansky for an example of
could you,
how does the town back out of a situation like that?
who is that? What project is
This
that?
This is a woman who built without getting any permission. She built this humongously gigunda wall without engineering, without specs, without planning and zoning. And then she got a cease and desist order in it.
Where?
And it's just sitting there untouched. It's just north of Kent Greenhouse. And she wanted to refurbish this beautiful old building, which is now just rotting away. So it's like, I'll show it to you sometime.
Okay.
But in terms of like the town, where does the town doesn't have, you know, unlimited funds to go sue Carly to get this fixed? Like, how do we do this as a town? How do we not let that happen again?
Correct me if I'm, well, I don't know that the renovations at that particular building was considered a major. I think it was considered minor because they weren't really supposed to make any changes to the outside of the building. So when that wall went in, and Derek, it's the spot that's right in front of it's the blue house right in front of Dooley's, right in front of Dooley's
okay.
pub, and then right next door to the greenhouse. I'm not sure that the Architectural Review Board looked at that at all.
No, they did.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, because there was a big discussion on the design of the posts that were going to be holding up the roof there was a big discussion about what type of wood she was going to be using for the floorboards on the front deck. And ultimately what happened was the Architecture Review Board agreed on what they were going to be using. The rock wall went in without a building permit. It had nothing to do with me. It was a building permit. Anything that's above 4 feet in height that's holding back dirt needs to be a structure that's engineered. And so Bill was the one who issued the cease and desist order and said, you're not going to be getting anything to do anything else on that house until you go ahead and present me with a set of engineering plans. So that's where that sat. And then I think Pat Hackett did submit them, but through the building department, not through zoning. So, and right now, I can't think, there's no blight ordinance in town. Because in order to have a blight ordinance, you have to have a blight officer, and typically blight officers are somebody that's not affiliated with the land use office or any of the commissions. It's a third party to be to make sure that there's no conflict or anything. So we don't have that, right? And how do you make someone complete a job that they've started? And that comes out when they decide that they want to sell the property. They come in, they check the file. You can put, you can put things on the land records, that, they haven't completed a job, the jobs aren't done. That gets looked at when the file gets checked, when properties are being sold. And then, like I said, you can put, they're not liens. It's just like a letter that's on the land records that says, the job was initially approved and the work wasn't finished, and you're buying what you're seeing, basically. And so it ends up hitting them in their pocket in the long run. It's a long process, and sometimes we don't see it in our tenure, but it does work.
So if we take a step back from that, to take a step back from the horror stories, and I know mostly we have to deal with those horror stories because those are the ones that stand out. But if we take a step back and say, to make it through those first couple of steps of the process, does the Architecture Review Board feel like they've got enough information to understand the charge and to understand the parameters within which they're working? And I think I think you all understand the charge. I still think that there's some question with regard to the parameters within which you're working.
But it sounds like that's always it's always going to be the case. And also, like, reading through this and making notes, like you said, maybe that'll bring up stuff too.
Yeah. So maybe we can spend the next 4.33 weeks and decide, take a look at the regulations, take a look at what the charge is. And if you all want to make some suggestions as to what we can do, if you want us to take these design considerations and call them out into a document that you can maybe a checklist for you all to use, we can certainly do that. We can, we can spend some time in our planning and zoning commission meetings and come up with that list, with that checklist, if you think that might help you. And maybe we start there.
Ellen?
Sure. Sounds good. I mean, I think we would all love to keep the idea of the ARB going in our town and to help solidify its direction and understand how to keep Kent the way it is really our objective. So any way we can all help to go into that direction is wonderful.
Well, keep it the way it is, but keep it growing at the same time, but not too fast and not too unwieldy.
Yes.
So can I suggest that the next step for the ARB is to take this document and let's try to get a Word version of it, Donna, if we can, so that we can make any revisions to it as a board and make sure that we're comfortable with it and see if there are places where it's pushing the boundary a little too far or pulling it back a little bit, and hone it. But I don't think we have to reinvent it.
No.
And let's just start there. And then maybe next month we get back together and we review those changes. Does that
So-
seem like a good idea?
When you say Word document, what is it? What document? Are you looking for John Baker's document in Word?
No, I'm looking at the KVOD document that you sent us. That's a PDF.
You can't, I mean, you can make changes to that, but
No, I don't need the original document. I just need something that we can edit. I have a PDF that I can't edit.
yeah, but
Yes,
that's our
Donna.
zoning regulation, so that can't be changed unless
But
you,
we're talking
unless you,
about we're talking about specifically 5150,
can you
which
explain that?
says activity, sorry, 5150, let me get to it. Design considerations. Is that not the task of the ARB?
Yeah, but that's a zoning regulation and you can't just arbitrarily change that without making a change to the actual zoning regulation via public hearing and notification to the Council of Governments and the associated adjoining towns.
So Donna, I think that what Frank is suggesting is not that we want to change the regulation, but just that we can come up with a checklist or a document that the ARB can use as a guide in reviewing applications. You don't like that idea?
I don't care. I just want Frank to understand that this document that he's going to get in Word, even if he changes it in, it's not an effective document is
Oh,
what
yeah.
I'm trying to say.
That's
Right.
right. and they
Right,
don't
right.
want-
So
it
it's
doesn't want
really
to
just
be
a
an
working
effective
document.
For me, for my purposes, I'm looking for something that I can look at that help me establish what my job is. And these design considerations define it really well. And I want to just make sure that all of that language in there and the tasks in there make sense to what it is we're actually doing. So
We can,
I mean,
We can
I'll
do
try,
that.
I have to figure out how to create a Word document. I don't have a converter, so I have to
then
figure out how
forget
to
it.
do that.
All
And I'll
right, we'll
send
figure it
to you.
out. We'll
I'll
figure it
send
out. Don't worry
I
about it.
can do it. I just need to figure out what everybody wants, that's all. But yeah, that's fine.
so do we, Donna.
No, I'll send it as, I'll just send that one little particular section as a Word document.
Yeah, send us 5150. That would be perfect.
5150.
Okay. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah. But I mean, it's like we have our own sheet. We have our own document that we use as a guidelines based on their document.
Sort of a cheat sheet, and I'll speak with Donna tomorrow and make sure that make sure that she and I are on the same page with what I think that you all want, and she can tell me whether she thinks it's a really, really bad idea or
Okay, fair enough.
We'll hash it out.
Which you will.
See what's
Okay.
up.
Okay.
Okay.
Matthew, I'd like to thank you for beginning this conversation too, because I think, for the last umpteen years, we have been, working together, like, how do we navigate through this? Really not having anything more than like John Baker's hate of pork chops on the ends of buildings was really the one thing we had in our design thing. We're like, okay, we know we're not supposed to have pork chops. Other than that, it was like just a free gain. So if we could really hone in a better definition of how an ARB can work in our town, it's just great. It'd be great to have that. And then if this kind of commission is working for us in town, it will something that we can move forward with. Because right now we pretty much are defined by the personalities that are involved in the committee.
And that somewhat is a natural fallout of the previous members of the board.
And it can be dangerous.
Absolutely, it can be dangerous. We want to codify the your responsibility, your role. And it's,
Okay.
listen, I know I've been on the receiving end of some bad management and I don't like it. So when I like to give everybody a task and I like to give everybody the tools to perform the task. And that might,
Great.
that's all. Pete, any questions, any comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And are you happy with the outcome of the house in Rye after all, even though you had to make the changes?
It's I'm still happy with it. It was
Good.
it was considered it was received as too modern for the neighborhood. So we didn't have to, and it goes back to, I think, full circle to the idea that it's just, we didn't change the floor plan, we didn't change the site plan, none of that changed, right? It was just the way we treated the windows and the materials on the outside of the house to make it, and it's fine.
The clients are
So
happy.
it all comes
That's
back to
the-
pork chops.
Yeah, still no pork chops, but
Well, that's
Yeah.
good.
so, all right, thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks for having
All
us.
right.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye. So we'll